Hi there, everybody. My name's Matt. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Scalar, and I'm here today to talk around the people future unicorns hire when they're expanding globally. First things first, who's Scalar? We help companies scale through advisory and talent services. And in doing so, we've so far helped just over 500 tech companies scale globally. In doing that, we've helped place over 450 first on the grounds, and then obviously their supporting team in doing so. Made over 200 million USD worth of customer and partner introductions, and in doing so, helped create 48 unicorns. And one of the things that we've really noticed in our time working in this space is there's a pretty consistent theme around the type of people that unicorns bring into their business when they're expanding internationally. So I'm going to talk today from the perspective of a business. So what a business needs to do, what a business needs to look for when bringing that right type of profile in. But obviously you can reverse engineer that for, if you're a candidate, the kind of foundations a business needs to put in place for you to be successful if you're taking a first on the ground role, or you're being one of the first people into that business in a new region. And equally in terms of stacking up your CV to match that as well. So one of the first and most important things is during the market research phase. Obviously, I'm not going to spend all of my time here talking around go-to-market research, but when you're doing that, there's certain things in addition to that standard market research you need to do in order to be, really shape that key additional focus points when you're looking at your first few hires in a new region. One of the most important ones is, what does that local sales process look like? If you look at somewhere like the UK or the US, it's very focused around that SDR and that initial interaction point, whereas somewhere like Singapore, for example, is far more relationship and partnership focused. So just what are the differences in that sales process between the markets you're currently in and the markets you're going to? That can really help shape the type of profile you need when you're going there. And the second one being, who are your customers' sources of truth? For anyone who doesn't know what sources of truth mean, that's basically where they get their information, who they trust in the market, who they're kind of getting their information from. If you can identify who they are, that should really play a part in identifying the right person as well. Any regulatory knowledge that's essential for your sector, obviously massively different depending on the type of business you are and the market you're going to. Given the market opportunity in the new region, what's the expected team size that you're aiming for in the long term? I think a lot of businesses launch into a new region and kind of let the market dictate to them how big that region is going to get. Whereas before you go in there, you can decide if that's going to be, likely one of your major hubs and be a large office, or it's going to be quite a small one. That can be some legwork you can get done early, which can obviously lead into the type of profile and type of experience you're looking to bring in. And the fifth one is that any difference in the market demands from what you're typically used to. I'll mention sort of Singapore again as a comparison to the UK, but the standard of acceptable customer support in Singapore is far higher than what you potentially expect in the UK or even the US. So again, depending on the market you're going to, if there are things like that, it can really make a difference to you deciding on what that first profile needs to look like and to whether or not you're the right person in that business to come in as the first person. In addition to kind of the skill set that early hires need to have, there's a real focus on the mindset that they have when they're bringing into the business. And I think this is very much one of those where fish rots from the head in many ways. And if you go into a new region and you go in with people who have the wrong mindset, then it can be very hard to recover that, and it can always set you off on the wrong foot. So first things first, it needs to be someone who has a very commercial mindset. Obviously, they need to come from a role where they've carried a personal revenue target. I think that's far more important than having a team target behind them. They can have both, but a personal revenue target and that need to get deals in the door early and that need to be able to get revenue coming through the door is crucial when you're going into a new market, because obviously there's only so much runway and burn rate you're able to have before you're not going to experience the benefits of being in that new market. Secondly is a really consultative client demeanor. I'm not here to tell you which type of sales is better, but I think in the early days, when you're going into a new market, it's not so much getting the revenue in from those new customers that's the most important thing in the world. Yes, you need it. Yes, it's helpful. But that feedback from customers, having a collaborative approach with your first customers through the door to be able to really localize your offering, localize your product to that new market can make all the difference and can actually help you in winning some of the larger sort of lighthouse customers down the road. if you start with some slightly smaller ones and slightly more consultative relationships. The mindset of that person coming into the business as well needs to be excited by the long-term goals, but with a short-term focus. So they need to realize that this is going to be the hardest time they're probably going to have within the business. They're going to be their own SDR, their own customer support, their own account manager, sometimes their own marketing, depending on the budgets you have when you're going into a new role. So it has to be someone who's excited about what can be, but isn't going to kind of step back from that day to day. So that kind of long-term goal driven, but with that short-term focus. And the fourth one is they need to have really dirty hands. Not a hygiene comment, more so from a standpoint of, there is going to be the longest job description the world has ever seen if you list off everything this person's going to be expected to do. But they can't be the kind of person who will ever say that's beneath them or that's not going to be their job. So it's that getting that right mix between the experience and the gravitas to drive these things forward, but also having the humble nature to be consultative with clients, but also driven in terms of what they're delivering. In terms of the background they typically have, what we want to see is someone who has experience in that particular market. Your product is going there for the first time. Your service is going there for the first time. It's going to be there's already one new thing happening there. Having someone else go there who hasn't been in that market before, who doesn't understand the ways of working, is just adding another variable into the mix, if that makes sense. So I think for me, having someone who's been there, done that with that customer base in that region can be very beneficial. I know there's a lot of people out there who typically will say around sending someone from your head office and having your culture transposed in that new region is really valuable. I'm against that a little bit. I think that in terms of your culture, if you have an office in the south of England and the north of England, they'll have a slightly different culture, even though they're 2 hours away. So I think just to expect your office in San Fran and your office in Singapore to have the same culture is a little bit pointless. It's more so making sure that you're seen as a local entity within that market and being able to communicate the way they want to be communicated with. Secondly, I think it's important that they have experience in working with a remote or a global HQ. I think if you've got someone who's used to that blending of cultures and reporting up to someone who's in a different region, not done that before, I think that's a really exceptional sort of sign that they're going to be a good fit for your business, because they'll be familiar with the difference in expectations between markets. I would also say that they need to have an active presence in an applicable networking group within that region. So not just that they play tennis and they're in a certain club or anything like that, but I think if they're part of the business networking groups, they have that credibility. They've put those yards in to be able to get to know the business community at a wider point, can help give you that credibility and help give you that kind of push in the new market, which you otherwise have to wait for. So often when people go to a new market, they're sort of saying, I'm expecting to get revenue 12, 18, 24 months time. And it doesn't have to be that long. Normally 9 times out of 10 when you're doing that, it's a case of you've neglected the ecosystem part of it and you have to wait for what you're shouting to be listened to. Whereas if you do the ecosystem part and you're able to have people talking about you when you're not in the room, those sales cycles can get a lot shorter, and it can help you really make the most of that new market entry. I would also say that their background needs to be from a smaller business rather than a larger corporate. Again, this is focused really on that hands dirty, used to doing a little bit of everything. When you see people step out of large corporates, although they kind of have that gravitas in market, they sometimes want to step away from that day-to-day a little bit too early and get back to those sort of grandeur heights in their career. So that can really set a business back a little bit because they're not doing the hard yards as well as the fluffy stuff. In terms of the personal network of that senior leader, that's what you really want as well. Those first people on the ground to be able to be networked within senior leaders of that customer base. And this links back to what I said before. It just means they can have a slightly more consultative conversation earlier, and you can get that feedback coming back for how you need to develop your product, how you need to develop your service, or whatever it is when you're going into a new market, to make sure that you're able to really sort of take the market by storm. Another point that we'll look at is kind of the track record of those early hires. And typically the track record that you're wanting to see is someone who has that cultural awareness and those language skills if they're required. Just someone who, again, has been in that market, has done their yards, is known for what they're going to do and what they're going to say. someone who has problem solving experience as well. So someone who can demonstrate, if you're thinking around the interview process in terms of the type of questions you're going to be asking and finding out if they're there, or again, if you're the candidate, kind of things you're going to want to be able to show an employer you've solved, is really, being able to show when you have taken the initiative, when you have been able to problem solve, when they've been able to drive that success and drive that change in your region. Typically, you can kind of, I got a question. What priority do you place on having the networking, group connections versus the other characteristics you mentioned here? I would say it's probably in the top two easily. If someone has been very successful in their career and not been part of those networking groups, I still think that would set back their ability to deliver as an early hire in this role. So for me, I would put it right up there in terms of top one, top two skills that they're looking for, is to be able to have those networking group connections for that ecosystem effect I talked about soon. I hope that helps, Rhonda. Third, a consistent promotion and development within the same business. We don't want to see a candidate who has bounced from business to business to gain those more senior positions. We want someone who has come through the ranks, has been recognized for good work, recognized for delivery, and increased their responsibility and trust. That typically shows a lot of point number two has been exhibited, but also that they have been able to deliver every single time they've been given a new challenge. Typically, again, if you're talking about years of experience, things like that, and you're typically looking at someone with maybe sort of 4 to 7 years experience in this realm, but potentially across 2 businesses instead of 6 or 7, and someone who has been able to show those developments in the career. I would also say someone who has a varied background is great. If they've taken that step from SDR to AE in a single business and then continued down that road, fantastic. Even if they've taken a bit of a sideways step and maybe they've been responsible for marketing, maybe they've been responsible for sales as well. Again, this all goes back to the fact that they're going to get their hands dirty across so many different things to be successful, that varied experience, we almost want them to have that before they join the business, so they're not learning how to do that for the first time. And number 5 is that experience of being the face of the franchise in that new region. It's unlikely that the founders or the senior leadership team are going to be able to completely up sticks from whichever region you're moving from, go over there and do the typical amount of PR, the networking events and everything else we've talked around. So this has to be someone who, that part of the business, is comfortable being in those situations and is comfortable with them representing the business the way it needs to be represented. And that's not for everybody, and that's absolutely fine. But if you're thinking around that structure of that early team, someone in the first 1, 2, or 3 hires is going to have to be that face of the franchise, is going to have to be out there. Otherwise, you're simply not going to be penetrating the market as well as need be. That was a little bit of a whistle-stop tour because I want to try and leave some time for any other questions that anyone's got. But like I said, anyone who wants to discuss anything specifically, more than happy for you to reach out to me directly. Matthew@scalable.com is my email. But yeah, I'm going to shoot through the chat and answer some questions at the minute. So Raul has asked, any thoughts on the seniority of early hires? Yeah, I think it is a case of people who are typically that 4 to 7 years I mentioned before. So I wouldn't particularly ever look at bringing in C-suite individuals from other businesses, where they've had teams of 50, 60. I think you want to have people who are close to the sort of grindstone in that and have experience in being hands-on. So for me, you're looking at that kind of level of experience. But again, depending on different industries, that will vary even more than the fairly big range I've given there. But the most important things are those mindset behaviors and the background that I've talked around here today, just to make sure they're still willing to do that and have the right motivations for a role like that. Hope that helps. Any other questions, or shall I get out of the way and let the next person come on? I think it's a pretty packed schedule. How important is the weighting on cash versus equity for early hires? Should we look for early hires that have a preference for equity? By Thomas. Yeah, this is a really interesting point, and it really depends on who you're speaking to or the situation of your cap table. If you look at a lot of the Y Combinator offers that go out to early stage, to early hires in new markets, they typically give 3 offers. One which is higher weighted towards salary and a lower weighted in terms of equity. One that's about a fair split, let's say, and one that's more weighted towards equity with a lower salary. I think that works in some ways. And I think, again, it does help you identify if someone is bought in for the long term, if they go for the equity weighted option. that's all well and good up until the fact that some people's circumstances won't allow for that. So as long as you've got that kind of mindset of it's not going to limit you from having the right candidate, the right profile, because they've got a mortgage or whatever else that they might have in their lives that they need to pay for. I think is a really interesting conversation to be had there. I would always structure offers so that the candidate has a selection of choices and you have a selection of choices, but I would probably lean into something where you're happy regardless of what that candidate's taking, but more so being able to put that on. So yeah, I think it's important to have equity in those early hires. I think again, it's getting people bought in for those long-term visions. But yeah, I hope that helps, Thomas. Well, good. Any other questions that I haven't had a chance to cover off, or anyone else who wants anything, feel free to shoot me an email or connect with me on LinkedIn and have a chat. But I'll get out of the way and let the next great speaker on. Have a great day, everyone. Cheers.